war involving Iran, the United States, Israel, and Hezbollah is entering a far more dangerous phase, with the fighting now spreading decisively across borders and dragging Lebanon deeper into the regional confrontation. What had already become a direct U.S.-Israeli war with Iran is no longer confined to Iranian territory or the skies over the Gulf. Along Israel's northern frontier, Hezbollah has opened an increasingly intense front from Lebanon, and the result is a conflict that is broadening in both geography and consequence. Reuters has described Israel's campaign against Hezbollah as a parallel operation running alongside the wider war with Iran, underlining how closely linked these theaters have now become. Hezbollah, the Iran-backed armed movement based in Lebanon, says it has dramatically stepped up its military operations against Israel. In a series of statements, the group has claimed repeated rocket, drone, and artillery attacks on Israeli military targets, troop concentrations, barracks, and border positions. Some battlefield claims remain difficult to verify independently in full, as is often the case in active war zones, but there is no doubt that the cross-border hostilities have sharply escalated this month. Reuters has separately reported renewed hostilities, evacuation orders, intensified Israeli strikes, and growing fears of a wider invasion in southern Lebanon. The immediate backdrop to this escalation is the war that began on February 28, 2026, when U.S. and Israeli forces launched attacks on Iran. Reuters reports that the opening strike killed Ayatollah Ali Khamenei, Iran's supreme leader, along with other senior Iranian figures, marking one of the most consequential blows to the Iranian state in decades. That attack transformed an already combustible regional standoff into open war, and Hezbollah's entry on Iran's side has since widened the conflict into Lebanon with growing ferocity. Since then, Israel and Hezbollah have moved steadily toward a much broader confrontation. Reuters reported earlier this month that Hezbollah warned residents in northern Israel to evacuate, a sign that the group was preparing to widen the range and intensity of its attacks. It also reported that Israel more than doubled troop deployments along the Lebanon border and began broader searches and operations in southern Lebanese villages that had been ordered evacuated. Those developments pointed to a conflict no longer limited to symbolic exchanges of fire, but one moving towards sustained military pressure on both sides. Hezbollah has sought to frame its campaign as a direct response to Israeli military action inside Lebanon. In its own account, the group says its strikes are meant to defend Lebanese territory, deter further incursions, and answer what it calls repeated Israeli aggression. One of the key lines carried in the material you shared is central to that message, Hezbollah said. These sustained and precise strikes underscore the group's unwavering resolve and operational capability in confronting the Israeli regime's repeated violations of Lebanese sovereignty. That language is important because it shows how Hezbollah wants this war understood not merely as support for Iran, but as a battle over Lebanon's sovereignty and deterrence on the northern front. On the ground, the fighting has turned deadly for civilians as well as combatants. Reuters reports that Lebanon has suffered more than 1,000 deaths and the displacement of roughly 1 million people since the renewed phase of the conflict intensified in March. Those numbers point to a humanitarian crisis unfolding alongside the military campaign. In practical terms, that means entire communities have been uprooted, local infrastructure has been shattered, and fears of an even larger Israeli ground push have spread across southern Lebanon and beyond. Israeli officials have made clear that they intend to keep raising pressure. Defense Minister Israel Katz said Israel would move to seize and hold territory in southern Lebanon up to the Litani River in order to create what he called a defensive buffer. Reuters reported that Katz also said Israeli forces would take control of remaining bridges and key infrastructure up to the river, presenting those sites as part of Hezbollah's operating network. The Litani River lies about 30 kilometers north of the Israeli border, so the stated objective amounts to a major expansion of Israeli military ambition inside Lebanon. That shift is one of the most important factual updates in the story because it moves the conflict beyond short-term retaliation and toward possible territorial control. Israel Katz said that Israel would occupy southern Lebanon up to the Litani River to establish a defensive buffer. Reuters reporting makes clear that this is not being described by Israeli officials as a temporary tactical raid, but as a more systematic reshaping of the battle space in the south. Israeli strikes on bridges over the Litani have reinforced those fears. Reuters reported on March 18 that Israel struck 2 more bridges over the river, with Katz saying the bridges were used by Hezbollah to move weapons. Lebanon and outside observers have viewed such strikes through a different lens as part of a campaign to isolate the south, complicate civilian movement, and soften the terrain ahead of deeper operations. When bridges, roads, homes, and basic infrastructure are destroyed at scale, the effects are never purely military. Civilians pay immediately, and the political message is unmistakable. That has become a central fear inside Lebanon. The concern is not just that Israel is striking Hezbollah positions, but that it is preparing to sever southern Lebanon from the rest of the country and create facts on the ground that will be hard to reverse. Reuters reported that the scope of proposed occupation up to the Litani would cover roughly 10% of Lebanese territory. For many Lebanese, especially in the south, it raises the specter of a prolonged buffer zone, repeated displacement, and a war whose end state is no longer clear. Lebanon's President Joseph Aoun has emerged as one of the key official voices condemning the Israeli campaign. Reuters reports that Aoun has been engaged in diplomacy around a possible ceasefire and has positioned Lebanon as ready for talks, even as the state's authority remains limited by Hezbollah's independent military role. In the account reflected by your source material, Aoun warned that Israeli strikes could amount to collective punishment and might be part of a broader project to expand Israel's footprint in Lebanese territory. Those warnings fit with the growing alarm in Beirut that the country is being drawn into a devastating war over decisions it does not fully control. The political situation inside Lebanon has also become more fractured. Reuters reported in early March that Hezbollah's decision to enter the regional war in support of Iran deepened its isolation at home, opening a rift with key political allies and exposing Lebanon to another punishing war with Israel. That matters because Hezbollah remains militarily powerful, but Lebanon as a state is carrying the social and economic cost. Every new exchange across the border feeds a wider national crisis inside a country already weakened by years of financial collapse and political breakdown. International diplomacy has so far failed to stop the slide. France has tried to revive ceasefire proposals and border arrangements, but Reuters reports that Paris itself has acknowledged the limits of what can be expected from the Lebanese government while Israel is bombing the country. France's envoy said it was unreasonable to expect Beirut to disarm Hezbollah under those conditions, a reflection of how unrealistic many external demands now appear amid active war. The immediate reality is that military action is setting the pace, while diplomacy is struggling to catch up. Meanwhile, the wider war with Iran continues to intensify. Reuters reported that Iran has launched long-range ballistic missiles, including strikes near Israel's nuclear site in Dimona and attacks on a U.S.-UK base on Diego Garcia, showing that Tehran retains the capacity to widen the confrontation beyond the Levant. That regional backdrop matters because every clash in Lebanon now unfolds under the shadow of a much bigger war. The Northern Front is not a side story anymore. It is part of the main escalation cycle. Against that backdrop, Hezbollah's military messaging has become more deliberate and more expansive. The group has publicized what it says were dozens of operations in a single day involving rockets, swarming drones, and artillery strikes. It has named Israeli troop gatherings, armored vehicles, positions in northern Israel, and bases near the border as its main targets. Whether every operational detail is confirmed or not, the pattern is clear. Hezbollah wants to show that it can sustain pressure, vary its methods, and keep Israeli forces under constant threat along the northern axis. Reuters has separately reported that the group has been drawing on lessons from previous wars as it prepares for a possible full-scale invasion and a prolonged campaign rooted in guerrilla warfare. The Israeli side, however, is also adapting. Reuters reported that Israel more than doubled troop numbers in the fight against Hezbollah and expanded operations in southern Lebanese villages. Israeli officials have repeatedly argued that Hezbollah cannot be allowed to preserve offensive capacity near the border. In that logic, destruction of infrastructure, deeper troop deployment, and eventual territorial control are all presented as defensive necessities. Critics, though, point out that the cumulative impact on civilians and civilian systems has been enormous. This is where the war becomes especially dangerous. Both sides say they are acting defensively. Both describe escalation as a response, not a choice. Hezbollah says it is defending Lebanon and answering Israeli attacks. Israel says it is securing its north and preventing future Hezbollah operations. Yet each new step by one side becomes a justification for a larger step by the other. That is how limited confrontation turns into open-ended war. The humanitarian picture inside Lebanon underscores the stakes. Reuters reported on March 13 that the United Nations launched a $308 million flash appeal to help Lebanon cope with the fallout of the war when displacement had already reached 800,000. By March 20, Reuters said the estimate had risen to around 1 million displaced people. The pace of deterioration has been startling. What begins as military escalation rapidly turns into social collapse when so many people are driven from their homes in such a short period. The tone of Israeli signaling has also grown harsher. Reuters reported on March 13 that Israel destroyed a bridge in Lebanon and threatened Gaza-scale destruction, language that sent a chilling message across the country. Even when officials frame such measures as anti-Hezbollah operations, the threat is heard by civilians as a warning that entire communities may be devastated if the war continues. That fear has now merged with the possibility of occupation. In southern Lebanon, where Hezbollah draws much of its support and where many Shia communities are concentrated, the prospect of a buffer zone is seen not only as a military move, but as a political and demographic one. If Israel presses north to Litani and holds ground, even temporarily, it will reshape daily life across a huge swathe of southern Lebanon. Families already displaced may be unable to return. Local economies may be broken for months or years. And Hezbollah, rather than being neutralized politically, may find new fuel for its narrative of resistance. This is why the Northern Front matters so much beyond the immediate exchange of fire. It is not only a military front, it is a legitimacy front. Hezbollah is trying to show that it can impose costs on Israel even while the region's strongest military powers are engaged against Iran. Israel is trying to show that it can break Hezbollah's cross-border threat decisively and redraw the map of deterrence in the north. Lebanon's government is trying to avoid total national ruin while lacking full control over the armed actor most central to the fight, and outside powers are struggling to stop a war whose logic keeps outrunning diplomacy. In practical military terms, the current pattern suggests more, not less, volatility ahead. Continued Hezbollah rocket and drone launches are likely to trigger deeper Israeli strikes. Continued Israeli air raids, bridge destruction, and troop buildup are likely to invite further Hezbollah retaliation. The chances of miscalculation are growing by the day, especially if strikes hit major urban centers, critical civilian infrastructure, or higher-ranking political and military figures. Reuters' recent reporting consistently points in that direction. No sign of abatement, parallel operations, rising casualties, and widening strategic aims. And so the picture that emerges is of a conflict no longer capable of being explained as a contained border crisis. It is part of a much larger war tied directly to the U.S.-Israeli campaign against Iran and to the upheaval that followed the killing of Ayatollah Ali Khamenei. In Lebanon, that larger war is now being felt through displacement, bombardment, infrastructure destruction, and the growing possibility of Israeli occupation up to the Litani River. In Israel, it is being felt through deadly cross-border attacks, military mobilization, and pressure to neutralize Hezbollah once and for all. For now, the message from the battlefield is unmistakable. The war is widening faster than diplomacy can contain it. Hezbollah is showing that it can keep the Northern Front active. Israel is signaling that it is willing to escalate far beyond punitive strikes. Lebanon is warning that what is unfolding could become collective punishment and territorial expansion. And the wider regional war with Iran is making every local clash more combustible than it would otherwise be. That is what makes this moment so dangerous. The fighting is no longer peripheral. It is central, expanding, and increasingly difficult to stop.